Good morning and welcome back to our study of Micah. So far we've covered 1 through 7. We've talked a little bit about the foundations of Micah, and we are going to dive in a little deeper today. But first of all, I am Pastor Josiah Black, and I'm from First Baptist Church in Peru, Indiana. So if you've been following along, where we're at in the story is Micah is trying to warn the southern kingdom of Judah that the calamity that is befalling the northern kingdom is headed their way. And that is what brings us to verses 8 through 12 of Micah 1. Let's hear those now. Because of this I will weep and wail. I will go about barefoot and naked. I will howl like a jackal and moan like an owl. For Samaria's plague is incurable, and it is spread to Judah. It has reached the very gate of my people, even to Jerusalem itself. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. In Beth-Oprah, roll in the dust. Pass by naked and in shame, you who live in Shapir. Those who live in Zanan will not come out. Beth-Ezel is in mourning. It no longer protects you. Those who live in Maroth writhe in pain, waiting for relief, because disaster has come from the Lord, even to the gate of Jerusalem. So, those are verses 8 through 12, and this probably seems pretty straightforward, but there's actually kind of a lot going on in this passage, and we're going to dive into that a little bit. So, first of all, I want to talk about verses 8 and 9. Now, what this is, what Micah is essentially doing, is what we call a lament or lamentation. Now, you might be aware there's an entire book of the Bible called Lamentation, and this is something that we as a modern Christian culture have kind of lost. We understand grief to some degree, although I would contend that we sometimes go out of our way to avoid it. But the idea of lamentation is something that I don't think we entirely understand. So, and you'll have to excuse me if I clear my throat. I'm a little congested today. But if we want to understand lament, we have to understand, first of all, that it is a kind of intentional and performative grief, which is strange to us because we, as a culture, both, I would say now as Christianity, at least in our American context, and Western civilization in general, when it comes to grief, we tend to make that a private experience. We make that an individual experience. That's for me. It's something that's internal. It's not something that I want other people to know about or participate in. And so we run into a cultural difference here almost right off the bat. Now, lamentation is a very specific kind of grief. And in this case, Micah is using it prophetically. He's using it to both express his own real sorrow for what's going on, and he's also using it to stir the people of Judah to action. He's hoping that by seeing him grieving, brokenhearted, afraid for what's going to happen to Judah, that they're going to pick up on that and they're going to react to that. Now, lamentation doesn't always move us somewhere. Sometimes it is just a natural response by humanity to what's going on in the world, to what God is doing. In the case of this, Micah is very actively seeing God's wrath. And it's not God sending lightning bolts down from the heavens to strike down the bad people or anything, but it's him using this group of people, the Assyrians, to essentially wreak havoc on the northern kingdom who'd been unfaithful. And again, Micah knows that that's kind of headed their way next. It's going to head to Judah next. So he is hoping that by lamenting in this way, he's going to catch the attention of the people in Judah. He's going to show them how they ought to respond to this by sort of doing that himself. And hopefully this is going to stir and move them to repentance. That's the hope, because this is a prophetic warning on the part of Micah, so we can't lose track of that. So when he describes in verse 8, because of this I will weep and wail, I will go about barefoot and naked, I will howl like a jackal and moan like an owl, he's talking about a very visible, intangible experience of grief. Now, if you or I went out and we wept and we wailed and we went around barefoot, and crucially, if we went around naked when we were sad or upset, obviously we would be arrested or we would have other kinds of problems and struggles. So I don't necessarily suggest emulating Micah in this, but at the time, the culture Micah was in, these kind of ideas and this particular expression of grief would have been very appropriate for catching the attention of the people around him. Now, did Micah actually go around naked, or is he just being sort of poetic about how bad this is? I don't know. It's entirely possible that he could have. It's also entirely possible that he is he's talking about this, but not actually doing it to express how rough this is. I also don't know what an owl moan sounds like, and I think that's a very interesting descriptor to use for an owl. But I don't know. Maybe I need to dive in a little deeper, figure out what kind of sounds the owls made in this part of the world at the time. But I think we can all imagine the howl of a jackal. But the point here is, it is big, dramatic, painful sadness. It is grief in real time. And that's what Micah is kind of doing and performing. So the next chunk, and actually we're going to look at 9 through 12 kind of all together, because those are those are kind of Micah talking about both why he's mourning and the scale, the scope of what's about to happen or what is happening. So first of all, his reason for mourning is captured in verse 9. He says, "For Samaria's plague," and again that would be the northern kingdom, "is incurable. It has spread to Judah. It has reached the very gate of my people, even to Jerusalem itself." So not to beat the same drum over and over again, but Micah kind of does, because he's trying to get a point across. What he's saying here is Israel was doing the bad thing, Samaria, those folks doing the bad thing, and that behavior has spread to Judah, my beloved Judah, even to Jerusalem. So when somebody in this particular point of time, when you make that even to Jerusalem kind of comparison, what he's trying to emphasize is that this is systemic on every level. It has even infected our capital city. And he's being illustrative and saying, essentially, it's everybody. It applies to everyone. Because if Jerusalem is their capital, it essentially, in this writing, represents everything else. So he's talking about this sinful behavior, this rebellious behavior, has now permeated every level of society. So that's why he's lamenting. And then he goes on to very poetically warn and kind of caution some very specific cities. We see Gath, we see Beth Oprah, we see Shapir, we see Zanan, Beth Ezel, and Maroth are all sort of descriptively said to kind of be in trouble or to be going through some hard things. So there are a couple interesting things in terms of what this is actually trying to say that I want to make sure you walk away with, okay? Because there are two layers beyond him just warning these particular cities. The first layer is, by sort of doing this laundry list of cities, he's again trying to communicate that everybody needs to be worried about this. So they all need to be concerned, because this same behavior is present in all of them, and this wrath that God is sending is going to ultimately affect all of them. So all of them are in danger from Assyria, and according to Micah, that is because they haven't been faithful, they've fallen into sin, they're rebellious. Okay? So by listing all these cities, in a sense, it's sort of him saying it's everybody. And so it almost restates the point of saying it's even made it to Jerusalem. Okay, so this is what Micah is trying to say. And this is the way that he would communicate it at this time, because for us, this all might seem like overkill. It might seem like, okay, we get it. You know, this is, everybody's in trouble. You could have just said that. But this is one way in this particular culture that Micah was building emphasis. So by saying it over and over again, by saying it in these several different ways, he's driving home the point that this must be taken seriously. So we always have to remember that there's this tension between our language, how we understand and communicate, and how the people at this time would have understood and communicated. And we have to make sure we're always doing that work to build a bridge. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to somehow entirely miss the point if we don't, every time we open the Bible, figure out the exact cultural content. That's not the point. The Spirit works, we will understand, things will go. but I think that this adds a little texture, it adds color, it adds depth to our understanding when we study these sort of things in depth. Okay, so number one was this idea that he's trying to communicate everybody's in trouble. The other thing that I think is very interesting, and I found this when I was doing my research for this particular study, one of the commentaries that I have observed that in the original Hebrew, each of these cities and the statement that he pairs with it is a pun of some kind. So I'm going to post there's a little chart I've got. I'm going to post that as a comment when I post this video, but I want to run you through a few of these. So the city Gath sounds like the Hebrew sound got when you say it. And in this phrase, when in the original Hebrew, he says, tell it not to Goth, right? That's what we've got. The verb tell sounds just like the verb or the word got that's in Goth, okay? So what he's doing is essentially a pun, all right? The way we would, similar sounds in the English language, he's doing this on purpose. He's playing with the sound a little bit. That one's a little bit more abstract. This one is less so. He says, in Beth Oprah, roll in the dust, okay? So Beth Oprah literally means house of dust. So he's doing these little things, these little puns with each city name. Hey, city of dust, go roll in the dust. That's how bad things are about to get. Shapir is called pleasant and beautiful, and he tells it to pass by naked and in shame. So in a sense, he's saying this thing that is pleasant and beautiful will become ugly. He's playing with these terms. And then the last one I thought was interesting. They've all got something. But Beth Ezel means house of taking away. And in the original Hebrew, he essentially says, rather than in English we say it no longer protects you, it essentially in Hebrew says your protection is taken away. So all of these things, for every city name, the thing that he says about it is in some way a pun on its name. Now, the commentator did note that the last one, Meroth, Meroth means bitter, and something in the Hebrew of the writhe and pain thing sounds like an inversion of that, but the commentator was like, if this one was supposed to be a pun, that one's not a particularly good one. These others are pretty clever. That one he was kind of stretching. Kind of like when you've got two words that almost rhyme but don't quite, and you can still kind of try to pair them. That's essentially what he was doing here. Now, I think this stuff's really interesting. I don't necessarily expect you to agree, but I appreciate it because it reminds me that God was using people to write these. These aren't mistakes. We got exactly what we were supposed to get. But it's this interesting little touch of character that comes from, here's a guy who's trying to speak to his people and convince them that they need to change their ways. And he was using every rhetorical and literary ability he had at his disposal to try to catch their attention. And they're layered on top of each other. So we have some very clever puns, and we have one that was kind of weak. But you can almost imagine Micah like shrugging his shoulders and saying, look, you get what I'm trying to do here, guys. It's going to be bad. And please repent. Please turn back. We need to fix this. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting. I thought you might think so too. That's what we've got for this week. Taken all together, this is really both an expression of lamentation, that sort of act of grieving we talked about, and it is a condemnation and warning for all these cities and for all the people of Judah. And this is Micah, again, trying to do all of this, hoping that Judah will turn around, will go the different direction, will come back to the way of following God. So that's everything I've got for today. I hope that this was edifying for you. I hope that you learned a little bit. And I will post the chart with the puns. If it didn't make sense when I was trying to explain it, hopefully when the chart goes up in the comments, that will make more sense. So thank you for watching, and tune in next week, and we'll continue on in Micah. All right, have a great week. Bye.